Everybody. Okay, so this is section one of chapter one, the diversity of Americans. The basics. What is civics? The study of the rights and duties of citizens. The concept of citizenship dates back to ancient Greece and Rome. Only men with property could vote. And a lot of our institutions actually date back to Greece and Rome, and we'll talk about that more when we get into what type of government we have. Today, citizens are people who are 18 years or older, and we will talk about how you gain or earn citizenship. Today, most people are citizens. Gender and wealth are no longer requirements of citizenship. Early on in America, you had to be a free man who was a landowner, and then it just became a free man, and then it became free men and women, and then now, kind of where we're at, anybody pretty much is a citizen. And we'll talk about the requirements here in a minute. Citizens owe loyalty to the government and are entitled to protection from it. Duties and responsibilities of citizens. Duties are what you are required to do. Okay. Duties are we're required to obey laws, pay taxes, serve in the military, serve on a jury, go to school. Okay. Those are duties. And actually, for our country, serving in the military isn't a requirement. That is an option. It's more of a responsibility. The responsibilities, things that we should do: vote, be informed, participate in the community, respect others. Another word for that is tolerance, and then respect their property. Citizens share common history, customs, and beliefs. They agree to follow rules, accept government and the authority in exchange for our national motto is E pluribus unum. It's out of many, one. Meaning out of many people, we have one unified government. Diversity. Many different citizens of the United States. There are more than 300 million people who live in the U.S. today. Roughly, I believe there's 330 million. All of us are descendants from families that immigrated at one time or another. So Native Americans immigrated across the Bering Strait. There used to be a land bridge there before it was flooded out, and it used to connect. Then you have early immigration from Europe. First country to do it was Spain. They came in the 1500s. They came to Florida. If you are really big on trivia, the explorer was Juan Ponce de Leon. He came in the early 1500s in search of youth. The Spanish founded St. Augustine. Florida was the first successful European settlement. And it's the St. Augustine is actually the oldest city in the U.S. 1600s, you have more people coming from France and England, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Everybody remembers from the 1600s the Pilgrims, but popular things from that are the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, Thanksgiving. A lot of people kind of know about the English side of it. A lot of people don't know about the French side. So a lot of their settling came here and then down toward the south along the Mississippi River, which is right here. Whereas the British came here down the east coast, down everywhere except for Florida, which the Spanish had already claimed. Okay. That'll be important later on because of the Louisiana Purchase. The French settled in Canada and along the Mississippi River. The English settled along the east coast. Okay, and that's how we got the 13 colonies. During the late 1600s and 1700s, immigrants from Germany, the Netherlands, Ireland, Scotland, and Sweden joined the English settlers. That's why we have a lot of the war. And a lot of times, like New Hampshire, New York, those things all come from these countries here. Their old ones are here, like York, Amsterdam, Hampshire. They're all in these different countries. U.S. Independence Day, July 4, 1776. After the U.S. gained its independence from England, it became known as the Land of Promise. The number of immigrants began to grow after the U.S. gained its independence, mainly because it was, this land of promise where people could come for a new hope, for a new start. So the number of immigrants grew from 1830, 600,000 to 2 million by 1850. And between 1860 and 1890, you have 10 million more Europeans. Okay. 1890 to 1924, you have 22 million come over from Italy, Greece, Poland, and Russia. Part of that is because of World War One, and then the last 50 years, our the primary place where immigrants come to the U.S. from are Latin America. Okay. Enslaved Africans did not come willingly. They're from Western and Central Africa. Africans were sold as slaves in the Caribbean islands and North and South America. 500,000 people were brought to America as slaves. There's a diverse population. The American population is diverse in terms of ethnic, racial backgrounds. Today, some common groups are African American, Native American, Asians, whites, and Hispanics, who typically just means they come from a Spanish speaking background. The US population is about 330 million, and it's still growing. Religious diversity, we are predominantly a Christian nation. About 67 to 70% claim some form of Christianity, whether it be Catholic, Protestant, independent. The other large religious groups are Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindus. And actually, all four of those are smaller than atheists. More people identify as atheists than those groups. The Bible Belt is where we live down here in southeast U.S. The Rust Belt is this spot just below the Northeast. It's usually around the Great Lakes. That's, you think of Detroit, Chicago, a bunch of your big manufacturing jobs, especially like Ford, Chevy, those places are up here. Okay? That's why they get called the Rust Belt. The Sun Belt, okay, again, named because it stays warm, is mostly the southern U.S. That's why you see a lot of people retire down to these states, because once they get done up here and they get done working, they move down here and retire down here because it's much better weather. Transforming America, we have shifted from a rural to urban society. Factory workers are typically your blue collar workers, non-factory workers, offices, stores, white collar workers. They get called this because typically back in the day, if you went to a factory, everybody were wearing blue shirts with blue collars. If you went working somewhere in an office building, you typically wore white collars. Okay. Traditional jobs held by women, nursing, waitressing, those were pink collar workers. Also, again, because typically they wore pink color. Transforming America, women no longer stay at home anymore. Typically, you have working moms. Both parents typically work in most households. There are still stay-at-home moms, but it used to be a norm. It used to be the normal thing for women to stay at home and the man to go to work. But now, both parents a lot of times work, regardless of gender. Manufacturing goods to a service economy. So we went from producing things to serving things, if that makes sense. So, for example, practicing law or medicine, programming computers, teaching, those are all services, pilots. So there's been a shift in the population within the U.S. Specifically, this one is talking about the shift in the population after the Civil War. So after the Civil War, freedmen headed north for jobs and a new life because they wanted to get out of the South. This mass migration was called the Great Migration, and it involved about 6 million African Americans moving north. The North has always had the highest population throughout the U.S. history. This is partially because if you go to the North, it had more ports, it was more established. Today, the South and the West are the fastest growing regions in the U.S. Other changes in population, the average lifespan of citizens has gone up. The average lifespan of men is 75 years old. The average lifespan of women is 81 years old. Education levels are up, meaning more people are finishing high school, going on to get some further education, whether that be community college, bachelor. Latinos are the fastest growing ethnic group by numbers, but the fastest growing percentage group are actually Asians. Their percentage is higher. American values and institutions, judgment based on values, a broad idea about what is good or desirable and shared by society. Values influence the way we act. For example, if you value money, you might do something in order to get that money. If you value time with your family, you're going to do something in order to get time with your family. What you value is going to influence how you act in order to achieve that value or that goal. So American values, they get depicted quite a bit. One of the great artists that does this is Norman Rockwell. These are all pretty famous paintings by him. Town Hall, Prayer, Sunday Dinner. I believe that looks like a hospital or a doctor visit. Okay. He captured images of America and their values. And a lot of these are based on freedoms that we enjoy: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Basic American values that are some of the things that unify us. We value freedom, equality, opportunity, justice, and pretty much most people agree on at least half of this list, if not all the list. But they may have different views on what freedom is, what equality is, what opportunity is, and that's where we tend to get our differences. But a lot of people share these same values, just may have different views on what these values mean to them. Country's founding documents. These are the big three, which technically this third one is part of the second one, and we'll talk about that more when we get to it. But the Declaration of Independence is the first one. We've already kind of brushed it up a little bit. July 4, 1776, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all men are created equal. That's where we get our ideas from, but the actual legal stuff, laws, come from the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, okay, which came in 1787 and 1791. And again, when we get to those, we'll talk about them more in depth. So, popular sovereignty. Government is run by the consent of the governed. So basically, the people are what power the government, not the other way around. So fair, free, regular elections, equal justice under the law, and majority rule through representatives. Okay. Again, we're not a true direct democracy. We don't do everything by popular vote. We do it through representatives that we vote in, which usually the representatives are popular vote or direct democracy, and then the representatives vote on the larger issues. Okay. Single common language. English unifies Americans. It is the number one language in America. Primary means of communication, education, government, and business. Secondary one is Spanish. Some American institutions. These are not places, but ideas that people have about relationships, obligations, roles, and functions. There are family institutions, religious institutions, educational institutions, social institutions, and so people have ideas on how family should be, on what religion should look like, on what education should look like, on what social norms are supposed to be, like when you go out, how you're supposed to act, and what government is supposed to look like. Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address in 1861, said, "This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it, or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it." So again, just a reaffirmation that the people, not the government, are in control, and that the people have the right to change the government in order to fit them if they have changed over time. Okay, which we have and we do. That's why we have so many amendments. And again, we'll talk about that when we get to the Constitution. So, Section 2, who are America's citizens? They're citizenship by birth, okay, which is what most people are. Those are people who are born in American territory, like Puerto Rico, Guam, on a U.S. military base. They're all citizens of the U.S. If they're born outside of the U.S., but both parents are citizens, they're also a citizen. If one parent is a citizen who has lived in the U.S. and who has citizenship, then the child can be a citizen. Or children born on U.S. soil to non-citizens gain citizenship at birth. Dual citizenship is when people have citizenship to two different countries. So it could be a child who's born to American parents somewhere else, or vice versa, if their parents who have citizenship somewhere else but come to America and become naturalized citizens, which we'll talk about in a minute, and their child's born here, then that child can have dual citizenship. So the U.S. Constitution establishes two ways to become a citizen. The one that we just went through, which are births, being born on U.S. territories, being born in the U.S., or being born with parents who are U.S. citizens. Or the second way is naturalization, which is a 5-part legal process taken care of by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which falls under the Homeland Security. But that 5-step process, you go through it, and then you're able to become a citizen at the end of it. Okay, so this is the process. Step 1, you file an intent. It's called a declaration of intention, stating that you want to be a citizen. Step 2, you have to live in the U.S. for 5 years. Step 3, you have to be 18 years old or older. And then step 4, you take a naturalization test, okay, which also includes an interview with the USCIS. Okay, and then the last step is where you take a public oath. Native Americans in 1924, Congress made all Native American citizens of the United States. You can lose citizenship. Most of the time, this applies to naturalized citizens, but every once in a while it can apply to people who were born with citizenship. Okay? Only the federal government can deny citizenship. States can deny voting privileges to citizens. For example, if you were to commit treason. But here are the 3 ways to lose citizenship. Denaturalization, again, that's the most common way. It's if you are here and you're naturalized and you do something, then they can strip citizenship from you. Expatriation is where if you had citizenship here in the U.S. but went and lived in a foreign country for an extended period of time, then you could lose citizenship here. And then conviction of crimes, specifically treason, which is aiding or plotting against the government, attempts to overthrow the government, taking a government job in another country, or serving in another country's military would be a way to lose citizenship. So aliens in America, no, not the little green guys in spaceships, but meaning people who are foreign without citizenship. So illegal aliens, U.S. allows only 675,000 immigrants to come into the country each year. The Immigration Act of 1990 shifted priority from relatives to productive people. So basically from people who are already living here who are trying to bring their relatives over to people who would be contributing, such as doctors. There's estimated 12 million aliens in the U.S., and a lot of them have to face the fear of deportation, which is being sent back to their own country. Many immigrants come for work or for a better life. Here are some pictures of people who are immigrating. Most of these are illegal immigration. Last year, the Border Patrol picked up 600,000 illegal aliens and deported them back across the border. And there are different ways that people can try to cross it. The United States Border Patrol is the law enforcement unit of the USCIS. Their responsibility is to detect and prevent illegal entry of aliens into the U.S. The Border Patrol guards the border between the U.S. and Mexico, the Canadian border, the coastal waters surrounding Florida, and the island of Puerto Rico. Aliens in America, there are legal aliens, and these are people who get established permanent residence here in the U.S. They may stay without citizenship. They entered the U.S. legally. They are the same as regular citizens: job, property, public school. They pay taxes. They have protection. The thing that makes them different is they cannot vote, they cannot serve on juries, and they cannot work in the government. They must carry their identification at all times, commonly referred to as a green card. Section 3 is the government and the people. Government is the ruling authority of the community or society. What governments do are they keep order, they establish laws and courts, they provide security, they protect the citizens through services such as police, firefighters. They provide public services such as libraries, schools, hospitals, parks, water, utilities. And they guide the community through public policy and establishing budgets. The levels of government for us are national government, so often referred to as federal, so the federal government, state government, and then local government. And local can usually be split up between county and then city if you live within a city or town. So the national government is made up of 3 different branches: you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Okay. Now, each one of these can get broken down into even more based on federal, state, local, but big picture, you have three different branches. They are judicial, executive, and legislative. Now, the legislative gets broken up into two more sections. There's the legislative group is made up of Congress, and when people talk about Congress, they talk about the House of Representatives and the Senate. Let's see if I can get that to go away. There we go. The House of Representatives and the Senate. Two ways the national government is different from other levels of government. The national government is the highest level, and so it has the most priority. The local or state governments cannot make laws that go against the laws of the national government. So, for example, if the national government says, here's one example, it's fairly recent for y'all. For example, when Colorado legalized weed, for a long time, no state could legalize weed because there were federal laws against drugs such as marijuana. So when Colorado legalized it, it actually became a Supreme Court case because they had to take it to the Supreme Court and determine, was this going against the federal government? And so the federal government has the priority. If they say something, the state and the local can't do anything to go against the federal or the national. Okay. The national government provides the basic framework for citizenship. So types of government, you have democratic governments. These are the foundations of democracy, began in ancient Greek city of Athens, which means all the citizens met to debate and vote on issues. So this is where we have that term direct democracy or popular vote, popular democracy. For example, if we were a true direct democracy, we would meet on every law and every issue. They would have to call us together. It is not practical for the most part because we have so many people in our country, and because of large populations around cities. And this is because it's happened several times in our U.S. history, but the one that's probably most relevant to y'all that y'all remember was the two presidential elections ago, the one between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She won the most votes, but Donald Trump won the electoral vote, which are the representatives chosen to vote for the states. So the reason why Hillary Clinton won the popular vote was because of the cities. But she didn't win the most votes from the states, so Donald Trump won. Okay? That's why direct democracy tends not to be the most successful. Representative democracy, citizens choose smaller groups to represent them. The United States is the oldest representative democracy in the world. It's a system of limited government in which people are the ultimate source of power. Give me just 1 second. America is known as a democracy, but it's also known, or AKA, a republic, a representative democracy, or a constitutional republic. So it has democratic principles. Abraham Lincoln, government of the people, by the people, for the people. Three major points out of that. The power of the government comes from its citizens. Americans through representatives run government, and the purpose of the government is to make the U.S. a better place for all who live there. Voting in democracy, one person, one vote. We do it on a secret ballot system, meaning that you don't have to have somebody standing there looking at what you're writing. Okay, the voter chooses. There are competing political parties. Typically, there are two, Republican and Democrat. Majority rule, people abide by what most people want. Here's a picture of a voting machine. So, other types of government, there's a constitutional monarchy. Another type of democracy where the government's kind of split. There's a hereditary ruler who is limited by the country's constitutional laws. They typically are more of a figurehead. They're the head, again, today they're heads of states, they're figureheads. They are there for the public. A lot of times they'll do announcements, but as far as actual policy, they don't get much power. They can sway the public opinion and maybe get them to vote a certain way, but they are not that involved with actually lawmaking. Some examples are the Queen of Great Britain or the Emperor of Japan. Authoritarian government, power is held by an individual or a group of people. They're not accountable to the people, and they control quite a lot. The types of authoritarian governments are absolute monarchy, dictatorships, totalitarianism, which focuses on controlling every aspect of an individual's life. Some examples of that, like an absolute monarchy, are the King of Saudi Arabia or the Emir of Qatar. They inherit their position. A lot of times they're tied into their religion. So, for example, their power is unrestricted, but it's bound by Islamic law for these two. England used to be an example of that, as well as France. Back when they used to be monarchies, their kings inherited their position by divine rule, which was their argument was that God had appointed their families there, and that's why they got to stay in power. Much like the King of Saudi Arabia and the Emir of Qatar. A lot of times, when you have absolute monarchies, they are tied pretty closely to their religion. So the government and the religion are not separate; they typically run hand in hand. Dictatorships, they exercise complete control over the government. They take power usually by force. They rely on their military to stay in power. They tamper with elections or refuse to hold them in order to stay in power, and they limit freedoms of speech, assembly, and press. Here we go. Some examples are Muammar Gaddafi. He was the dictator of Libya. Fidel Castro, he was the dictator of Cuba. He killed 30,000 people. Saddam Hussein, who was the president of Iraq, he killed 600,000 people, including a group called the Kurds, who were a faction of Islam, admitted to torturing and killing those who are against him. He was tried and executed in 2006 when he was 69 years old and was executed. Totalitarianism, government control extends to almost all aspects of people's lives. They ban political opposition. They regulate what industries and farms produce. They suppress individual freedom, and they dictate what people should believe and whom they may interact with. A lot of times, this gets associated with communism or fascism. So currently, the top dictators who have total control are Omar al-Bashir, who is the dictator of Sudan, specifically Darfur. He's killed 300,000 people and driven 2 million from their homes. Kim Jong Il, 63, he died in 2011. He had 250,000 in re-education camps, basically concentration camps. It's the world's most tightly controlled society. His son now runs it, who is Kim Jong Un. He's the youngest head of state in the world. He is following his father's footsteps, basically people who are opposing him, conducting public executions, and sending people to political prison camps. He is violating quite a lot of human rights. Here are some pictures of North Korea. The most famous dictator is Adolf Hitler. He was the leader of Germany during World War II. He killed 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, and then an estimated 6 million others who were political opponents, African American or Africans, or of another racial or ethnic group that he did not like. Here are some pictures of the Holocaust. Historically, the worst dictator through history has been Joseph Stalin. This is the Soviet Union back before they were called Russia. They were called the Soviet Union. Also during World War II, they had the Great Purges where he would go through and wipe out political opponents. He killed between 15 and 23 million people during his reign. And here's some pictures from Russia. So the American people go into the melting pot. So you have a lot of different people who have immigrated and have a lot of different customs and traditions that they've brought with them. Chinese, Irish, Italian, Mexican, Russian. And they've all kind of mixed together and made American. That's why we call the melting pot. So the American people, another analogy people use are a tossed salad. You got all these different parts that end up making this piece. So American diversity is more than just a merging of cultures. We have a lot of different types of diversity. If you did not know this, our school is actually one of the most diverse in North Carolina. So diversity also is not just racial or ethnic. It can also be sexual or sexual orientation. This is a political cartoon between heterosexuals and homosexuals. There's a heterosexual who's saying you're undermining the morals of civilization, and heterosexuals, just like homosexuals, have had this, but the people who are fighting for the gay unions, meaning gay marriage, are a lot of times committed long-term relationships, and then some people who are fighting against it are also the same people who have domestic violence history, child abuse, and divorce. So it's just the irony of telling someone they can't get married. But again, diversity comes in many different forms. So, what does diversity look like to you? Make sure you answer this in a Google Doc and attach it. It should be anywhere from 4 to 8 sentences. Just type in what diversity looks like to you and what you think diversity is.